Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to begin by thanking all the firefighters who day in and day out put themselves in harm's way to protect the public. Last summer, ahead of the Public Services Day, I had the pleasure of visiting Loughborough Fire Station to meet some of our fantastic local firefighters from Loughborough and Shepshed, to hear more about their work and, importantly, to thank them for all that they do. One such firefighter from Shepshed sadly died in 2016 while on duty at Castle Donington Fire Station. Paul Wilkins, at the time of his death, was enrolled in the Legacy 1992 pension scheme and was in the process of being tapered on to the 2015 pension scheme. As the Minister will know, the new pension scheme was introduced as part of the then government's reforms to public service pensions, which would see pension benefits based on career average revalued earnings rather than final salary. Crucially, the transitional provisions of the new scheme created three groups of members determined by age of the individual. First, active members of the legacy scheme who were born on or before the 1st of April 1967, who would remain in the scheme and receive full protection. Second, active members of the legacy scheme who, born between the 1st of April 1967 and the 2nd of April 1971, who would be entitled to tapered protection under the transitional provisions, allowing them to remain in the legacy scheme for an extra 53 days of each month, by which their age on the 1st of April 2012 was over 41. And lastly, active members of the legacy scheme born after the 1st of April 1971, who would receive no transitional protection but would be transferred to the new scheme from the 1st of April 2015. As I have mentioned, Mr Wilkins fell into the second category as he was born in 1969 and was due to be tapered into the new scheme in 2017, the year after his death. As well as the change to pension benefits based on career average, the new scheme introduced an important new provision concerning the surviving partner's pension payable on death of an active member. Regulation 76 of the Firefighters Pension Scheme (England) Regulations 2014 stated, "For the purposes of these regulations, a person is a surviving partner in relation to a member if, at the date of the member's death, that person is A, the spouse or civil partner of the member, B, cohabiting with the member, and 1, is not married or in a civil partnership with that member, and 2, is not the spouse or civil partner of any other person, and 3, could enter into a marriage or civil partnership under the law of England and Wales with the member but has not done so. 4, is financially dependent on the scheme member or is with the scheme member in a state of mutual financial dependency, and 5, is in a long-term relationship with the scheme member." This differs significantly from the legacy scheme, the equality impact assessment of which only dealt with marriage, civil partnership and other aspects of relationships, but not with those who were cohabiting in a heterosexual relationship. This has impacted adversely on Mr Wilkins' partner, Melanie Perry, with whom he had been in a relationship for 10 years at the time of his death, 9 of which they had been cohabiting. They also owned their house and paid their mortgage and bills jointly. They had 1 child together, and the children from Melanie's previous marriage lived with them, along with Mr Wilkins' daughter from a previous marriage. Mr Wilkins loved and cared for all the children equally, both emotionally and financially. They were in every sense a family and a single household living in one property together. However, after Mr Wilkins' death, Melanie was informed by the pension manager at Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland Combined Fire Authority that, while they had investigated their ability to award her the death grant, they were unable to do so, as Melanie and Mr Wilkins were not married. As I have already set out, had he died just 1 year later after he had tapered into the new scheme, Melanie would have been eligible to succeed his pension. Therefore, had it not been for the decision to taper the transition onto this scheme and Mr Wilkins' date of birth, Melanie would not have been in the difficult position she is now. It should also be noted that Leicestershire and Rutland Combined Fire Authority was able to award all 4 of the children a fire service pension whilst they were in education, as they were satisfied that they met the criteria of substantially dependent on Mr Wilkins, even those from Melanie's former marriage. Melanie has been trying to rectify the situation since 2016, having initially approached my predecessor for assistance. As my predecessor's caseworker, I attended a meeting with the Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Services Assistant Chief, the Pensions Manager, as well as 2 Fire Brigade Union's officials to discuss the case. The Combined Fire Authority and the then Fire Minister were also contacted in writing, but unfortunately no further progress was made at that time. In May 2018, a further letter was sent to the pension trustees, appealing for reconsideration. In their response, they were clear that they had no power to apply discretion to the case. This was again reiterated in September last year in a response I received from Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Services Chief Fire Officer, who stated that it has never been the case of not wanting to resolve the situation. It has always been around the technical ability and then the legality of doing so. Sadly, the rules around the 1992 pension scheme are clear. They allow no discretion on the interpretation of the scheme by the scheme manager, the Combined Fire Authority, or myself. Meanwhile, a response I received from the Fire Minister shortly before also made the point that the responsibility for applying the rules of the 1992 scheme and deciding an individual's pension entitlement ultimately rests with each employing fire and rescue authority, in this case Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service. Notwithstanding this, each employer is required to comply with the scheme's legislation and does not have discretion to pay benefits to an individual where there is no entitlement. I would ask the Minister then that the Fire and Rescue Authority be allowed to have discretion in this unique matter. Understandably, Mr Wilkins' death and Melanie's subsequent efforts to rectify this pension issue has had a profoundly negative effect on her. In her own words, when I answered the door to a firefighter on Tuesday the 23rd of August 2016 at approximately 10:30 a.m, and the words that came from his mouth were telling me that Paul had died at work on duty, my life as I knew it came to an end. Nothing in my life has or ever will be as hard as living with the trauma and grief that follows the death of your life partner. Imagine living with a scream inside you and the scream is yours, but no one else hears it. That is grief. Not only have I had to learn to continue to live without Paul by my side, I've had 4 children to navigate through the minefield of grief that is forever ongoing. As they grow older and mature, their emotions and understanding of the finality of death is sometimes impossible to be able to help them to comprehend. It is just so devastatingly unfair. Challenging the decisions made in relation to a survivor's pension these past 5 years have taken so much of my time and energy that would have been far better placed supporting my children and myself in learning to live without Paul and without the financial provision that he would have expected us to receive. The pension changes were made to ensure that all firefighters were treated equally, yet this is far from how we have been treated. Paul devoted his life to serving his country as a Royal Engineer in the British Army, serving in Bosnia and the Gulf War, and then as a firefighter for Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service, of which he was immensely proud. He would have been so bitterly disappointed that he had spent his life protecting others, yet nothing had been done to protect and support his surviving partner. Of course, more widely, the discretional protections have been heavily criticised, with the Court of Appeal finding them to be discriminatory against younger members. I therefore welcome the Government's proposals to remedy this discrimination, and I am particularly supportive of the proposals surrounding the deferred choice underpin and the retrospective remedy, which is due to come into force by the 1st of October 2023. It is right that members already receiving pensions are given a choice as soon as practicable as to which pension benefits they would prefer to receive in respect of any remedial service rendered between the 31st of March 2015 and the 1st of April 2022. However, as I set out in my response to the consultation on the firefighters' pension prospective remedy, unfortunately this will not address all the discrimination protections caused, the effects of which are still having a substantial impact on Mr Wilkins' surviving family members. I would therefore ask that the secondary legislation contains provision to ensure that surviving partners who would have been eligible to succeed a pension under the 2015 scheme, had their partner not died during the transition before they were tapered onto the reform scheme, are able to succeed the pension. As well as the moral argument for such a change, I should also add that the financial burden would be minimal, seeing as neither my office, Melanie, nor the Fire Brigades Union have been able to find any other instances of this. Unfortunately, this was a perfect storm of being the wrong age, sadly passing away at the wrong time, and not being married. For, had Mr Wilkins been 2 years younger, or had he passed away 2 years later, or had he and Melanie been married, Melanie would not have had to fight for access to his pension and endure so much hardship at an already difficult time. We know that issues have been identified with the tapered protections, and so I would ask the Minister to please consider new provisions to allow her to succeed her pension. I am glad to have brought this issue to the attention of the House, for how can it be in the 21st century that we have a situation where a woman cannot claim the pension of a man she has had a home with, a family with, and a mortgage with, simply because they were not married? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Minister, Damien Hines.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.